Over the years, I've had lots of opportunities to observe and consider and advise people in terms of career choices. And as I gaze out over the world today, I think that one of the greatest decisions a young person can make is the career that they choose. I think this was always true, but as things get more complicated, more volatile, more difficult, more expensive, it becomes even more important. So that's basically why I'm making this video. What you'll find is that things are going to continue to get more volatile, more expensive, more opportunities will close. And what you will see is that the outcomes of people who either possess or have access to wisdom will differentiate at a much greater pace with every passing day. So more choices will matter more, and you'll find that decisions earlier in life will continue to increase in importance in terms of determining how your life is going to go. Not just the quality of your life, but also the scope of decisions that are still open to you throughout your life. So one thing about wise choices is that they beget wise choices. If you make wise choices early in life, the more often you do so, and the more wise they are, the greater your freedom will be later in life. The more choices you will have available to you later in life. And the opposite is also true. And so it's really terrible for you to wake up one day and you're 42 and you have nothing but regret for how you've lived your life. Now, from the outset, I'm just going to be explicit that my target audience with this is young men. The reason for this, as I've discussed in other videos, is if you're a wise young man, you'll be worried about your career. If you're a wise young woman, you'll be worried about finding a husband who worries about his career and having children as early as you can and dedicating yourself to those people. That will bring you the greatest amount of joy in your life. For a man, the things that will bring him the greatest amount of joy are strongly correlated with how much money he can make. Up to a point. I'm not talking about the difference between earning 1 million and 10 million a year. I'm saying the difference between earning the average per capita income and 2 or 3 times that. There's a mountain of difference between those three amounts in terms of many, many things. In terms of the resources you have to do the good that you can in this world. Not that everything is about money, but the way the world is currently structured, your ability to do good for others is very much tied to your ability to support yourself, a wife, and as many children as she can handle. So, here's the theme, and it's something you really should figure out. Things are changing, and they're changing at an accelerating pace, and they're not changing for the better. What used to work no longer works. What used to work no longer works. So there's a saying that the military is always training to win the last war. The next war will be different circumstances, and those who have optimized against a past war are probably going to lose the next one. To quote the proverb, without vision the people perish. You have to have vision. You have to see how things were, how things are, and how they are going to be. And if you don't have vision, you need to find someone who does and vet them and listen to what they have to say. What used to work no longer works. If you go to your dad for career advice and he happened to succeed in the conditions of yesterday, if you follow what he did, the odds are you will fail today. Because what worked yesterday will not work today. I could give you example after example after example of this. My own life is one of these. So I've probably worked in 25 different, I won't call them careers, but let's just say fields. But the majority of my life has been in computer science, my professional life. And so I've been a software developer at the entry level, the mid level, the senior level. I've owned my own company. I have a tech company. I've also been a computer science professor. And I would not recommend anyone do any of those things today. And I have reasons for that. So I would not do any of those things today if somehow I hit a reset button and I found myself in the body of a 15-year-old with all of my understanding and memories and wisdom. That's not something that I would do. So what are some of these changes? Well, today houses cost maybe 2 times what they did around 2 years ago. And families cost around 2 times what they did around 2 years ago. Food is expensive. Clothing is expensive. Cars are expensive. Homeowners insurance is expensive. Car insurance is expensive. And all of these things are going through the roof, and many things besides, due to inflation, which is due to many other things. And if you dig into the causes of all this stuff, none of it is going away. It's just going to get worse, and it's going to get worse faster than it has in the past. Now, the interesting thing about this is with all this change, it's surprising to see that the change has stayed the same. What I mean by that is you'll find that throughout recent history, these things just keep happening. If you know someone who is an adult, I was just on the cusp of that in 2008. If you know someone who was an adult in 2008, you will be able to learn from them just how different things became after that crash. The cost of everything went through the roof. Well, some things collapsed, but then they went through the roof. But things like food and fuel, they went up by a lot. And that happened very quickly. But this isn't the first time. If you go back to 2001, things changed significantly. That was the year I graduated from high school, so I wasn't so much a party to that, but those that were in business during that time, especially the tech industry, they saw some significant challenges. But it's been happening even before that. It's just that the distance between these watershed events has closed. They happen more often now, and the results are more extreme each time. And so eventually, if we haven't already, we're going to get into a death spiral where these things are just continuous. It's no longer discrete events. It's just a continuous thing, like someone turning up a knob instead of someone hitting a light switch. So there's no such thing as normal anymore. You need to live in to use a calculus phrase, you need to live in the second derivative. And I apologize for using a math analogy there. It's a weird thing to use something that confuses most people to try to make things simple. But what I'm saying is, don't look at the shape of the line. Focus on how quickly the shape of the line is changing. So normally you'd look at a line and you'd be able to extrapolate the end of it and say, well, if we just kept drawing this line, it would go in the same direction. If you do that on a curved line, you have to pay really close attention to the end of the curve. Because if it's mostly straight, but then starts sharply shifting, if you were to continue the line, you couldn't just make it straight again. You'd have to increase the shift because you're increasing the shift before the extension. Hopefully that makes sense. It'd be easier to draw. So, in a nutshell, this is what's going on. There are far fewer opportunities. The potential gain for each of those opportunities is smaller. And the long story short is that the bar is raising, and you have to be a lot better to be successful today than you would have had to have been 5, 10, 15 years ago. And especially 20 years ago or 30 years ago. In the 1980s, you could roll out of bed, just apply for some random job, and be middle class. That's not going to happen today. You have to beat the odds. So why does all this matter? If you're a young man, basically everything that matters in your life is going to be determined by how much money you make until you hit a certain threshold. And then after that, it's diminishing returns. And eventually the juice won't be worth the squeeze. But that's a great problem to have. So we're not going to address it. That's a very easy problem to solve. You just work less or you stop working, right? But until you get to that point, it's going to determine everything that matters in your life. Where you live, how many children you have, when you can have children, whether you even get married or not, the quality of spouse that you can attract. The right woman can make almost any life worthwhile. I would say any life. I wouldn't even qualify it, but let's just be safe. The wrong woman will make any life not worth living. No matter how good it seems on paper, you will wish that you're dead. And that might seem an extreme statement, but if you don't believe me, just go talk to married men. And you'll find the majority of them regret getting married. And they say that they would absolutely not do it again. And so it's an odd thing, because marriage and family is, in my opinion, is absolutely, incomparably the only path that can provide great value in life. There's nothing that compares to that. There are other things you can do, but it's not going to touch the value you can encounter in marriage and family. And yet, if you end up with anything close to the average situation, it would be better for you to just die. That would be a greater path of happiness than going that route. This is not my opinion. This is, if you ask random dudes, that's what they'll tell you. If they're being honest, if their wives are not around. And that's really sad. Okay, so you need to understand that this isn't you sailing into the sunset. You're walking through a minefield. And while the objective on the other side is absolutely worth it, if you treat it as a walk in the park, your legs are going to get blown off and you're going to wish that you had died. So hopefully that's a stark enough qualification. And did I say that on? Yes. The fact is that a wise woman, the kind of lady, the only kind of lady that's worth marrying today, because most aren't, just like most guys aren't worth marrying for the ladies, you're in a situation where you're no longer fishing, you're hunting. You have in mind a minimum threshold, and nothing less will do, because it will be a mistake. It will not be worthwhile. It's better to be alone than to be married to a substandard person. Now, if you are a substandard person, that definitively means it's better for you to be alone, because you don't qualify for someone worth marrying. But a wise woman today fundamentally will be looking at your income first and foremost. Everything else she will only consider if you qualify in that regard. And that's because things are so bad that if you are not way above average financially, she cannot have kids. If she does, they're going to end up scoundrels, because you guys are going to be on welfare, and or they're going to be in public school, and that just comes with a whole bunch of things that are that have a dwindling probability of escaping as time goes on. There's a 20% chance right now that a child that goes through public school is going to end up with extreme issues with either gender dysphoria or suicide. Well, extreme issues, I mean, there's only one issue with that, or with severe mental health problems. And those, none of those things would occur outside of that bubble. Those are all induced situations. And so, anyway, I think I've dwelt on this for long enough, but a wise woman is going to see this as a must-have. And there are good reasons for that. There are good reasons for that. Again, the way it was yesterday is not the way it is today. It's different, and it's not going back. So a wise woman has to look at that. She has to be cutthroat about that and unremitting in her standards financially. And so if you don't meet the bar, she's going to pass you over for someone who does, or just remain alone, because why would she pretend to be doing something that can't reach the outcome she desires? And the fact is that things are changing so rapidly, and they are so different already, that if you don't get on this early and do it right, you're not going to make it. So, learning all these things is kind of a bitter pill, okay? That's an understatement. But don't get all bitter about this, right? It is what it is. You can't change how it is. You can just change what you're going to do about it. The fact is that there's some silver lining in this cloud. The real reason that all of this is happening is part of the outflowing of the things that have to happen at the end of the world. The end of this world, not the end of the world strictly speaking, but the end of the current way of things. And that involves a shift towards justice. Now, when I say justice, I have to qualify this because it's one of very many words that have been subverted intentionally to mean something that it doesn't mean. Justice means you get what you deserve. That's all. And so it's merit. Right now, if you look around, you'll find that it's very hard to find someone whose life matches what they've paid to have it. So you'll find some people, very few, but you'll find people who have less than what they deserve. That's kind of a hard thing to find. But most people have much more than they deserve. Much more. So if you look at historic norms of wealth and what that means in practical terms, it's not a dollar amount, it's a lifestyle. You'll find that modern people are swimming in unmerited wealth. And that is going away. It's evaporating very quickly. So you'll see that trend continue, and in order to adjust to that, or to play those cards to your benefit, the only approach is to deserve more than you have. So if you want a radically better outcome in life, the only way to get there with the way things are going is to be a radically better person. So you could look at all this in a dark kind of way and say, oh, well, it's just hopeless, who cares, whatever. Yeah, okay, whatever. You could choose that path. It's not going to go very well, but you could choose that path. Or you could choose a perspective that you're being empowered, like you still have options out the wazoo, and you have every opportunity to become a radically better person. And in addition to that opportunity, in the modern world, you also have the motivation. Because if you don't do this, your life is going to be a living hell, more so than your forebears. So there's very little safety net, and what's left is evaporating. So the floor, the worst possible experience, is getting worse by the day, and that will continue to accelerate. But the best possible experience, it in some ways it's like a flag is being raised up a pole, or some signal is being given to illuminate the path. And that's a very important concept that I'll just leave right there, but I'll talk more about that in books and videos. So here's your recipe. Your goal is to be able to say that you are the most blank person you've ever met, and to be able to stuff as many positive attributes as you can into that frame. So a few really important ones are being the most productive person you've ever met, being the most truth-loving person you've ever met, being the most intelligent person you've ever met, being the most hard-working person you've ever met, being the most long-suffering person you've ever met, being the most honest person you've ever met, being the most selfless person you've ever met, etc. To the extent that you live your life so that these things are true, you will encounter the greatest meaning as a man. So, suppose you meet someone who is, or you just already know them, who is more of whatever than you are. Well, that's a wonderful thing, because you have a living example of attributes that now you can emulate in yourself. It's a very important principle. So you can find mentors and see in them the improvements that you could make to your own life. So this is how you hack justice. Now, the situation you're in is that you're in a system that is not designed for your success. If you look into the history of public schools, you'll find that they were created intentionally. This is on record, it's documented. This isn't some fringe theory. They were created to create factory workers. They were also created to delay entry into the workforce, to reduce the labor pool. So it's babysitting with the added intent of making you less capable, less able to think, less willing to take risks, less capable of creating, less capable of leading or challenging. So that's not exactly a wonderful way to spend your time. They're purpose-built to hamstring you, and they are very good at it. Now, it's really tricky to escape that system if you're in a place where your family or other resources don't afford your having access to mentors who can guide you through some alternative process, whether that be homeschooling or dropping out and taking some community college courses and getting a GED instead of wasting your time in public school, or whatever the case may be. You can get as elaborate as you would like, but it takes sacrifice on the part of someone who has greater resources than you do in order for that to happen. So you might be kind of stuck, but you can still do a lot while needing to check the boxes of public school. You can read books by people who accomplished something in life. You can watch videos by people who have accomplished something in life, and you can gain access to all these massive resources that are just all around you. And what we're going to be talking about in a moment, which is the primary subject of this video, is planning your career. You can start that when you're 14, 15 years old. You start that when you're 12 years old. You start that when you're 10 years old. And the earlier you start, the easier a time you're going to have of it, and the more advanced you're going to be compared to your peers. The primary output of this is that you're going to be further ahead in life at a younger age. This makes an enormous difference. You can, if you wanted to, you could open a spreadsheet, you could create a spreadsheet that calculates the monetary difference over a lifetime of someone who only starts their career at 30 versus someone who starts it at 18. You will see an enormous difference. There's all kinds of variables that could go into that, but the most basic version of this is to just assume the same starting salary, and then to calculate what the absolute difference in earnings is over a lifetime. But that doesn't tell the whole story. It's actually an even more extreme difference, because you have huge differences, like, can you pay cash for a car versus do you need a loan? And then you're paying all this interest if you have a loan. Or you can buy a reliable car instead of a car that has tons of miles on it and you're constantly going to be making expensive repairs to. That's just one very specific thing. You could do the same thing with houses. You do the same thing with earning interest and having investments and so on. So it's an enormous difference over time. It's like a completely different life. And that most people, they don't figure out what they're going to do until they're over 30 today. And it's like that's the point of a life of that's the point in a man's life where he should already be deep into what he's going to do. And everyone's just on this extended childhood thing. So people use college as a filler because they don't know what they want to do. You should only go to college if you know what you want to do, and it absolutely requires college, and you've already looked at every way you could try to avoid it. Even then, not all colleges are created equal. So that's probably enough about that. So let's say that you're whatever age, and now you're going to start thinking about what you ought to do with your career. Here's my first piece of advice. Learn to ask yourself why until you get to the root of what you're actually wanting. So the why will get you to the what. Too often, we just think about the what, and we haven't even asked why once. And not surprisingly, when we look at that, what that what points to, and we go through it, we don't find what we were looking for. It ends up being way less than what we thought we would get. So do your due diligence. Don't pick arbitrary things for arbitrary reasons. Don't just look at what other people you know have done or what seems easy and familiar and treat it like a menu at a restaurant. Your life is not a menu at a restaurant. You're a captain on a ship in the middle of the sea that can go in any direction. That only changes as you get older and your poor choices narrow your future choices. But when you're young, it's up to you. You choose your path. So if you limit yourself to what those around you have accomplished, you're going to limit yourself to what they have accomplished. And it's even worse than that because, like I said, things have changed. Things are way worse. And so if you aim for what someone else already achieved that you happen to know, you're going to achieve far less than that. Far less. Odds are it won't even be worth it in the end. So you really have to pay attention and think about this. So you should design, live, and continuously update a life plan. You're going to need inputs from other people who you probably don't already know, who know things better than you. And as you cruise through life, according to your plan, aligning yourself with this plan, you're going to learn things from other people and from your own experience, and you can shift that plan. And it's super important to have a plan, stick to the plan, and revise the plan when life shows you it's necessary. So here's an example. So I like talking to young people about what they're going to do with their lives, and usually it only takes me a few seconds to wedge into an uncomfortable conversation. It's not uncomfortable for me, but it is for them. So I met a young person the other day. This is a little while ago. Probably 22. He told me, I don't remember. 22, 23. I said, so what are you doing with your life? What are you choosing for a career? And he said, well, I want to own my own business. So all these red flags immediately went up in my head. I should say orange flags because I had not yet drilled down to the full story. But those were, there was an instant cloud of items to address in my mind. So I said, why? Why do you want to own your own business? And this is always fun because people are inherently superficial. When you find a counterexample, it's one of the most beautiful things in the world. It's very rare. So people get used to just saying nonsense things in response to nonsense questions, and people are talking, but they don't really care about what they're saying, and it's just this codependent dysfunction. That's most human conversation is just codependent dysfunction. So he gave his nonsense answer to what he thought was a nonsense question, but he didn't know who he was talking to. So I said, why? And immediately I'm a level deeper than most people have gone, including himself. That was evident very, very quickly. And he said, because I want to be my own boss. I said, all right, well, why? So you see, and this is an interesting side note, people don't realize that when they talk with someone like me, they're not being exposed to some weird arbitrary routine. They're being brought into the internal routine that's constantly running. And in fact, they're experiencing a much reduced version of it. And this is the beauty of talking to someone interacting with someone who is further down the path than you are, whatever that path may be. It's a wonderful thing. They know what questions to ask that you don't know to ask. They know what matters beyond what you do, and they know by how much beyond what you do. And so it's a wonderful resource, an extremely valuable resource that I'll say much more about later. But we can just keep it to practical applications right now. If I wanted to build a house, the first thing I'd do is talk to someone who knows something about building houses, right? Obviously. It's extremely bizarre to think that somehow with just a desire to do something, you can supersede a lifetime of experience in trying to do that something. There's obviously tremendous value in things like beginner's eyes and that sort of thing, and testing things other people take for granted. So there are ways of accomplishing beyond your experience level, but you don't develop that ability without living deeply for a long time in the assumption that other people know better than you do. So people become wise only because they're first willing to become fools. And those who start the other way around will only ever be fools. Anyway, so he said, because I want to be my own boss. And I said, why? These conversations are great because you don't have to say much. He said, because I don't like being told what to do. And I said, well, that's a really bad reason. Here's some reasons that would be better. One, because I reliably find my ideas are better than those of others. That's a good reason, right? So I don't want to work for someone else because my financial viability is dependent on their ideas being better than mine, or their execution. You know, maybe they work harder and smarter than you do. And so it's a wonderful thing to work for someone that works smarter and harder than you do, because you get to piggyback into their success, and hopefully it's a win-win. You're contributing something too, but you're getting a piece of that pie that you could not qualify for by yourself. But if the pie's bigger by yourself, then go for it. But just not being told what to do by someone else, that's a really dumb reason, because it's not your why. You're not working to have a positive mental health experience. You're not working to have your self-esteem inflated. And I mean inflated, because if what they're telling you to do is better than what you would have done yourself, then removing that is to inflate your ego beyond what it should be. You should be told what to do. If what you're told to do is better than what you would otherwise do, that's a wonderful thing. That's improvement. That's better than what you would do. So if you're constrained by people who are less capable than you are, and therefore you want to be your own boss because you could do it better, hey, that's improvement, right? So what's the motive? Improvement. It's not feeling good about how you already are. It's becoming better and doing better than you would otherwise do. And for some people in some circumstances, that absolutely means working for someone else. The right someone else, but someone else nevertheless. So keep asking why. That's the point of this. This is very important. All right. So when it comes to whys, maybe one of the most important whys is to ask, why do people make money? or maybe how is a better word to use. How do people make money? So the MBA types will give you this definition about product market fit and all this business. Let's just toss this aside and get down to brass tacks. A business is an organization that does what others can't do or won't do. That is what defines what people are willing to pay for and how much they're willing to pay. They're looking for people who can do what they can't do or who can do what they won't do, or a product or an organization, whatever the entity might be. That's what makes money, what the person paying you can't do or won't do. This is a wonderful way to look at a career search. But we're getting down to the meat now. We kind of went off into some, I think, highly relevant preliminary topics. And now we're getting into the direct applications to career. Here's a tip. Don't try to answer the question, what do you do for a living? Certainly don't ask yourself, what do you want to do for a living? Who cares what you want to do for a living? You should ask yourself what you want, period, and then choose a career that aligns with that transcendent goal. It's just a means to an end. You could have a job you absolutely hate that is the best way to pursue what you actually love. And maybe you do that on the job, and more likely you don't. Because having worked many, many, many different jobs, I can tell you that the meaning available as a man, the meaning available as a husband and father far exceeds anything you could do at work. If you do it right, it far exceeds. The two don't touch. They're worlds apart. I've met many, many financially successful men who have abundant regrets for how they were as husbands and fathers during that time. So, if you don't believe my ranking of that, please feel free to talk to people who have attained success in the home or at work, and you ask them which one was more important, which one gives them more meaning, which one makes them more proud and more willing to sacrifice. Now, they're absolutely tied. That's the whole reason for this presentation. Is my observation is that you have to attain a certain level of material success in order to be a good husband and father. And otherwise, you're not going to have any of that meaning. You're just going to feel terrible for having ripped off your wife and kids because you were a loser. So that's not something that people should aim their life towards. Anyway, so don't try to answer the question, what do you do for a living, either. That question will just result in job titles. The problem with that is that what you do does not determine how you do it, and therefore it doesn't really determine how much you make by doing it. There are ways of doing the same exact thing that are worlds apart from how everyone else does it. And you will earn a different amount of money and experience a very different quality of life during your work, depending on how you do it. So I watched my grandfather, for example. Here's a specific example. He was in construction his entire career. And during my overlap of life with him, I watched him go through several iterations of how he executed his construction business. And it was all construction, but there was a tremendous difference with when he had crews versus when he didn't have crews, when he had a lot of crews versus when he just had a helper, when he had a whole bunch of trucks and trailers versus when it was just his, when he did residential construction versus when he also did commercial, when he did additions versus when he stopped, when he did entire roofs versus doing roof repair. All of that's construction. But the amount of money he made and how much time he had to work and what stress level he was operating under and how hard it was on his body were vastly different depending on all those possibilities. And so It's not about what you do. That's not the question. The better question is kind of a mouthful, but we'll say it and then we'll pull it apart. How do you maximally produce value for other people? Because remember, value is what you get paid for, not your title, not your job. It's the value you produce according to the perspective of the people that pay you. That's what business is all about. So when you try to optimize over the question of maximizing the value you provide over others, you're going to find things out and make decisions in a way that keeps you in business, which is good, and gets you paid the most amount of money in the least amount of time. And that's what it's all about. So let's break down this whole can't do and won't do to expand your mind and give you the resources to search and find what you're looking for. So when it comes to what people can't do, you have the things that people can't do at all. That's kind of an easy one to think about. You have things that people can't do as inexpensively as you can, as quickly as you can, or as well as you can. So let's go through some examples. If I'm in a wheelchair, I can't fix my roof at all. That's probably pretty dangerous to get up there in a wheelchair if you could manage it somehow with a crane or something. So that's a little absurd, but I mean, there are actually people in wheelchairs who have actual roofs, so not too bad. But let's say that you need to turn a wrench on a pipe and you're not very strong. That's something you can't do at all. So you need to hire somebody to come and do it. Okay? A lot of these things will come down to knowledge. I don't know how to solder a copper pipe together. I can't do that at all. Now, YouTube gives an avenue for those who are adventurous to open a bunch of possibilities to do-it-yourself projects, but some things, you want someone with 10 years of experience to handle your legal documents so you don't get sued and lose everything. That's something you probably shouldn't try to do yourself, maybe. There are many legal things that I think you'd be an idiot not to do yourself, but there are some that I would definitely hire a lawyer for. Things you can't do that the business can't do, you can't do as inexpensively as the business can. A lot of these things have to do with special equipment. If you need a $3,000 machine to do the job, or a $40,000 machine, like a Bobcat or something, odds are you don't have that hanging out in your backyard, right? And so it's cheaper to hire them to do it than it is to buy a Bobcat. Maybe you could rent a Bobcat, but whatever. What about as quickly as you can? This can come down to experience. Like maybe you can do it yourself, but it'll take you a week to figure it out and you're going to make a mistake along the way and you'll have to redo it. Maybe they could come and do it in 2 hours. And then as well as you can, this is a big deal, especially for wealthy people. If you like quality things, you're not going to want something that looks really bad or doesn't perform well. So that's a brief list. With any potential job, you can and should go over this list, because the more of these boxes it checks, the more likely it is to have staying power and to earn you bucks. So these are important things. If what the business offers is something that most people actually can do, that might be an indication that it's not as good of a business. If it's something that a lot of people can do for exactly what you're charging, or you're charging more than it would cost them to do, you're going to struggle in business. If you're a roofer and you charge 10 times as much as everyone else, you're not going to be in business very long. Unless you do the kinds of roofs that no one else can do, because you have all this special equipment, or you have an enormous crew and you can do these massive roofs, whereas normal companies can't handle it. Whatever. You could go through this list and it gives you some descriptors to evaluate opportunities. Then there's another side of this that I think is probably less obvious, and that's what people won't do. Now, in my opinion, I think that businesses that do what other people won't do tend to be safer bets than businesses that do what other people can't do. Because you have to ask yourself, what are you bringing to the table that someone else can't copy? If you have some invention or something that's protected in some way, that's one thing. But for most people, if all it takes to get into business is buy a pressure washer, odds are you're going to have a lot of competition, right? Because that's just not a huge barrier of entry. But if you're cleaning out septic tanks, no one wants to do that, right? There will never be a substantial number of people that want to pump poop, right? So things that people won't do tend to be more protected. And if you can find something that you actually don't mind doing, notice I didn't say that you were in love with, that is like off the charts undesirable for most people, you've got something on your hands. Maybe literally if you're pumping poop. But, sorry. That's actually a very desirable job in my opinion. Because I have yet to meet anyone besides myself who has said, I really wouldn't mind doing that every day. I wouldn't care. I just wouldn't care. But most people would. So you can get into deeper things with this, especially when you start talking about a startup. The reason most people don't start businesses, I'm not talking about turnkey businesses. Those are real easy. They're well known, and so the psychological impact is much less. But a real startup where you're building something from nothing, businesses like that are this unending well of unpleasant feelings. You start to question what you really care about in life and by how much. You break down boundaries of how you see yourself and other people, deep boundaries that extend far beyond your business. You need to be willing to suffer for a really, 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 really long time, like way longer than you thought you would. And you need to go at it way harder than you thought you ever would. It's this unending thing that you just keep putting more into, far beyond everything you thought you had to give. Other businesses that aren't startups might involve some of this, like a lot of people don't want to be septic people with the poop pumpers. They don't want to be poop pumpers because it violates their self-identity. They don't want to be identified as someone who pumps poop for a living. I would actually see that as a plus because I don't really want to interact with people who would see it as a negative. And so it's a nice filter for folks that I really don't want to talk to anyway. When I was a professor, I used to enjoy going to lunch at Taco Bell and suggesting that when people said, hey, let's go out to lunch, other professors, I'd say, yeah, let's go to Taco Bell. There was one in walking distance from the university. And if they turned up their nose and got offended by that, I was like, cool. And if I found someone who was down with that, it was a wonderful way to see that this was someone who is grounded, or just doesn't really have standards on what they eat. So that you could have the pretentious filter and also the intestinal health filter. Anyway, okay, so I mentioned before you want to try to maximize your time and your money. These are things that aren't on the list of most people today. They think that somehow they're going to achieve their meaning in life through what they do at work. You can do that in a way that contributes to your meaning in life for sure, but I think what you're going to find is when you put your whole soul into things, it reveals what doesn't yield deep meaning. I don't know if that makes sense. The things that you go all in on and the people will quickly reveal what things and people are not worth going all in on. what people tend to do after going all in on one or two things and people is they stop going all in on anything because they are so bitterly disappointed in the result of their first try. And when it comes to, this is directed towards young men. When it comes to young people, I would significantly encourage you to not hold back. Keep looking until you find something that's worth giving your all to. Now, I don't have any reason to hide the fact that I believe the only answer is God. Once you get up to Him in terms of things you're plugging your all into, you will find that from Him you can see things and people to plug everything you have into in a way that you're not disappointed. But everything you try that's less than Him, you will be disappointed. So you find that network by trying and not quitting. So you won't find that in your job. I'm just going to tell you up front. I've tried harder than anyone I've ever met across more jobs than anyone I've ever met. And maybe I'm wrong, but as far as I've found, you're not going to find that in your job. One of the interesting things about the fact that we're created in the image of God is that the value that God has to offer will only be encountered in things that involve people. Specifically, the pinnacle of that is going to be your own family. So I just kind of showed you the end from the beginning, but nevertheless, jobs are super important to that end, but you need to know where it is in the scope of things. And I've already made that case with the ladies. In terms of young men finding the ladies, that a lady that's worth marrying. So get the horse before the cart here, and it all clicks together. What you want to maximize is time and money. Not meaning, not feel good, not I don't get my hands dirty. It's time and money. Because that's what's going to feed what matters, which is people, primarily your family. So here's some tips of what to look for. So wait at the finish line. That's a phrase I did not coin, but it's been used, and I have used it in describing how young ladies ought to search for men who are worth marrying. They ought to look for men who have already accomplished what they know is required for their success in life, the woman's success in life. So don't roll dice, don't make a bet, just pick a winner that has already won. And men should do that same thing in terms of how they choose careers. So it turns out that building something from nothing is so difficult that no one understands how difficult it is unless they've done it. If you want to get enormously wealthy, the best way to do it is to create something from nothing or to engage in super risky behavior. The problem with that is that most people who do it fail, and they fail miserably. So that's not exactly a strategy for success, even though most successful people have walked that path. So here's a way to cut to as close to the same endpoint as you can without doing the same thing. It's the closest thing to a shortcut you're going to find. And to illustrate this, we'll talk about the gold rush back in the 1800s. Some gold miners got rich, but most did not. Most ended destitute or dead. So who got the most rich most consistently? There were the outfitters, the people who didn't mine any gold at all, but sold the tools to the miners. Why? Because they couldn't control who was going to strike gold or not. They couldn't do anything to control whether they would strike gold or not, but they could control where they were in that supply chain. By outfitting the miners, they'd make money whether the miner made money or not. So in a little twist on this, if you choose a field that caters to wealthy people, you are going to be in business for as long as there are wealthy people. And it doesn't matter how often or how extremely the paths to wealth change. The point is that rich people always want the same stuff. It doesn't matter who they are. If they've become rich, they're going to want the same stuff, for the most part. Not like Beverly Hillbillies, but most wealthy people want the same things. Even the Beverly Hillbillies moved into a mansion in Beverly Hills, right? So, wait at the finish line. Think about what wealthy people need and normal people need. But don't base your business on what normal people want. That's the worst thing you could do. I'll get into more of that later. So wait at the finish line and also optimize for something that allows you to live in a rural area. You can't say enough about this. If you want to escape most of the bad things that are happening in this world, the only way to do it is to move to a rural area. You want a place where your kids can go outside and play without getting stabbed to death or stepping on a needle or getting sold fentanyl. And the areas where that's true, the list continues to shrink. And guess what? They're all expensive. They weren't 3 years ago, but they are now. And it's going to get worse. So with that, it gives you a constraint that you can actually leverage for other advantage. The fact is that people in rural areas have to pay way more for certain things and also have way less availability for certain things. And the reason is because the people that provide those things don't live in rural areas. So if you live in a rural area and you can provide those things, you can leverage this. I have a guy who lives not too far away from me who's a multimillionaire, and he's in his 50s and he spends all of his time traveling the world. How did he get there? An excavation business. He just worked by himself. He didn't have employees, but he worked like a maniac doing excavation in a far-flung place. And so he was able to charge a lot more than the town rates because people didn't have to pay the town mileage. So when you hire a service provider in a rural area, you have to pay their normal exorbitant rates plus the time it took for them to drive to your house at that exorbitant rate. And so you can leverage that to earn more money in less time and still be providing a service to people at a lower rate than they'd otherwise pay. That's a win-win. It's a great thing. All right, what else? Look for, this is really important. I know there's a lot to this video. Rewatch it, jump around. There's a lot to this video. So you're not going to get it the first time around. Come back to it later. When you're looking at fields, there are many jobs that get easier the longer you do them, that you get faster at the longer that you do them, that you get better at the longer that you do them, and that you can charge more for the longer that you do them. If you can find something that's true for all of these, that's amazing. But don't do a job that isn't true for any of them. So what are the opposites of this? Something that gets harder the more experienced you get. Something that takes you longer to do the more experience that you get. Something that you get worse at the longer that you do it. And something that you can provide less value the longer that you do it. So, for example, most construction jobs, the older you are, you have more experience in knowing what needs to be done, but less physical capability in doing it. You become more reliant on employees, which are exceptionally difficult to find and keep, especially when you need them the most, which is when there's the most demand in the market because it's a fluctuating game. And so construction's horrible in the sense that the older you are, the harder it is to do. And the busier you are, the harder it is to find the people you need. So another example that might surprise you is programming. The better you get as a programmer, the worse your life becomes, because there's an asymptote in salary. So if you're a salesperson and you get better at your job, you just make more money. And there's a formula that you get in writing when you get hired that describes that relationship. In fact, the more you sell, you actually get paid more per sale. In, again, a pre-specified equation. But with programming, the better you get, the more you get the hard problems to solve. So the younger people, the least experienced people, less experienced people who get paid less are getting all the easy stuff that if you could do, your life would be puppy dogs and rainbows. But you get all the hard stuff. You're sitting there bashing your head up against the wall for 3 weeks on this problem that no one's ever solved in the world. And you get paid just a little more than the new guy, relatively speaking. You could be the best programmer in the world, but you're not going to make a ton more than an average programmer. Not relative to what the best salesperson in the world's making compared to the average salesperson. And so that's just the way it is. So you could go through each of these and find examples. I probably have made that apparent enough. So what are some positive examples? I already mentioned sales. The more skilled you are as a salesperson, the easier it gets. The more skilled you are as a salesperson, the faster it gets. The less of your time it takes to make a sale. So you could go through this with different jobs and quickly find that most jobs don't fit these descriptors and therefore should be avoided. I mean, you don't want to spend 40 years of your life doing something that just gets harder and you just get paid less per unit of production, which isn't your time. If you're cranking out things left and right. So if you're a mechanic, for example, mechanics at dealerships, they have fixed rates for each service. If you can do it in half the time, you get paid more because you get paid, it's piecemeal. Piecemeal jobs are a really, really good idea. If you can find a piecemeal job and you're the kind of person that's going to do what it takes to get better at it than everyone else, you're going to make a fortune. So those are things to think about. So what should you avoid? I did the inverse example of the things to look for in the previous slide, so these are some additional things to avoid. Things that pay poorly. Well, duh, right? So if you have a job that pays X and is always going to pay pretty much X, then anything that grows over time is going to pay better than that eventually. And depending on how close they are, it might be a more or less extreme relationship. But don't take a job that's never going to pay you well, right? That should be a well duh, but you walk around and there's people with these jobs. There's a wood mill in our town, and the people that get jobs there, their salary will always be limited to about $2 more than they started. And that's all there is to it. That's a terrible job, and it doesn't pay very well to start with. So if you're going to work there, and it's relatively extreme conditions, and the shifts are unpredictable, and there are layoffs because the business ebbs and flows, go work at Wendy's. Go work at Wendy's. You start immediately making more. You get all kinds of benefits, and if you have half a brain, you're going to be an assistant manager within a year. Right? And you can just keep going from there. All right. Jobs that require you to live in a city. This is a big deal, and a lot do. Jobs that require a college degree should be avoided at almost all costs. There are many, many unintended costs to a college degree today. What about fields that are going to break with the volatility that we're facing and will continue to face? Here's one that you may not have thought of, fields that require employees. So if you have a booming construction business, that's real nice, but what are you going to do when you can't find anyone? And by the way, that problem becomes worse when you're in a rural area. So young people don't want to work today. Even when they will apply, you probably don't want them working for you. So if you're the exception to that rule as a young person, don't get into a business for yourself that requires you to hire others, or a business that requires them to hire others. It's the same problem, because it's going to go under, and you're going to suffer because they can't find enough people. You're going to have more shifts, you're going to get paid less, the company will be less profitable, and so on. Try to avoid jobs you can't do as you get old. Your body will not last forever. It's going to start falling apart, and it's going to happen sooner than you think, and it's going to be worse than you think. So try to plan ahead for that, and think about how many old people you see doing the same job. If you don't see old people doing the job that you're looking at, it's not something that you can do when you're old. It's a pretty simple thing. So either you need to make your cash and get out, and that needs to be a viable option, or you need to avoid it, because it's not going to be something where you'll change careers or whatever. Here's a really important one. Don't do something where you can be replaced by a machine. If it's repetitive and it doesn't require your physical presence, it can be replaced by a machine. That's the simplest way I could tell you that as a computer scientist with an artificial intelligence specialty. Don't choose jobs that require normal people to have surplus money. I told you we'd get back to this, but this is related to the previous point of choosing things that cater to rich people. Most commercial enterprises are dependent upon normal people having extra money. So think of pretty much everything that's sold in a store that isn't food. It relies, Walmart is only in business because normal people have more money than they need. So as that money dwindles, or as it doesn't buy as much because of inflation, people cut back on all that. So like a car company is only in business because normal people have surplus money. So what happens when normal people don't have surplus money? Car companies go out of business, or they cut production lines. That's already happening. They stop making a whole bunch of the cars that they used to make. And they focus on ones that only rich people can afford, like $100,000 pickup trucks. You got to have a certain amount of money to be able to afford that. It's not a normal amount of money to spend on a vehicle. So there you go. There's a list of stuff to avoid. So at the end of this long presentation, I'm finally going to give you a list of potential jobs. Don't think that this is an exhaustive list, or that just because something's on here, it's a good idea for you. This is highly dependent on your circumstances, both where you live and who you are and what resources you have available to you. But here are some things that in general are probably a good idea today. And maybe most notable about this list is what's not on it. Now I will say one thing that is common to most of these that is not addressed here, it's a huge pitfall, is if you're living in a rural area providing services, so plumbing, HVAC, septic, roof repair, home care, whatever, veterinarian, you have to solve the problem of how to get people to pay, because they will stiff you. And disproportionately in rural areas, you're going to get calls from people who have a problem, not because of normal wear and tear, but because they're oblivious to things they should have been paying attention to. And that kind of person is not going to have money and will be very likely to give you a check that bounces or a credit card charge that gets reversed. So you have to solve that problem. Maybe you only accept cash, which means you're going to get less business because they don't have it. But again, if you're catering to wealthy people, it's less of a problem. So be forewarned. So number one on my list is sales. I don't think normal people realize how much money salespeople make if they're halfway decent. If they're not halfway decent, they get fired. So it's kind of a non-issue. Why do they make so much money? It goes back to what people are not willing to do. Sales is not easy. Okay, so this is definitely a can't do for a lot of people, but I think far more people could do sales than do sales. Why? Because sales is a terrible job for any normal person, because normal people don't like being rejected. They hate risk. So sales jobs, a lot, if not most, if not all of your money comes from commission. If you don't sell, you don't get paid or you get fired. It's a performance-based job. And most people just want to punch the clock and get a check. They don't want the risk. They don't want it to be on them. If you're the kind of person that gets excited when you're told you're going to get paid exactly what you're worth, then sales might be a job for you. And then finally, most people are not self-motivated. They're not going to intelligently optimize their entire schedule to maximizing sales. They're going to say, I don't feel like doing a call right now. I'm going to go fool around. And a lot of sales jobs, it's easy to fool around because you're just paid off of what you sell. No one is necessarily going to care if you're not working from 9 to 5. It's about how much you sell. Again, if that excites you, it might be the job for you. But I think there should be far more people getting into sales than there are. It's also a job that can be very accommodating to living in a rural area, because either you're doing the sales over phone or internet, or you have to travel anyway, so it doesn't matter where you live. So that might be something to look into. But there are many other jobs that are more available for more normal people, because normal people are not going to get excited about sales. So being a plumber is one. Plumbing is something that's protected by union regulations and or licensing requirements. The licensing requirements you're going to find everywhere. And that creates a barrier of entry. So that's a won't do. So most young people, all you need to get into plumbing is a GED or high school diploma. Most people won't get into plumbing because they don't want to, they're not excited about dealing with toilets and things. But also they don't want to go through the licensing process because it's years and years. However, you get paid that whole time. So the day you start as a plumber, even if you're just an apprentice walking in the door with no experience, you're getting paid, and it's good money. And it just goes north as you become, progress through the several layers of licenses. So the highest is master plumber. So you also make more money as you go through those. And plumbing is a job where it's not like it changes from day to day. As you get better at plumbing, you get better at plumbing. It's not, you're not going to see some situation that no one's ever faced before. The longer you work, the more you'll have seen the same things again and again. And so if you're smart, you can get really good at it. And if you live in a rural area, you might be able to find a place that doesn't even have plumbers at all. So you charge whatever you want. You're competing against the nearest town who's charging out the nose for people to come. And so even without employees, you can make good money. And if you're really smart, you could set up some system where you can charge more. Like essentially you keep increasing your price while you have more customers than you do time. So this is an alternative to getting employees. You just keep charging more and more. And so maybe you're only an emergency plumber, and that means that you don't have a predictable schedule, but on the flip side, you get paid out the nose per hour. So do you want to work a few hours and make a ton of money, or predictable hours and work longer hours? You have this sea of opportunities there. Everything I just said applies for HVAC as well. So rich people will always want functioning toilets, unclogged sinks, and air conditioners that work. And both those jobs are protected by licensing. So like it or not, that's something you can leverage to your advantage. I mentioned septic pumping, poop pumping. All you need is a truck for that and somewhere to dump it. I'm sure there are local regulations about how you can dump it and whatever, but this is not something there's huge amounts of competition for. So, and if there happens to be a poop pumper in your area and you live in the middle of nowhere, you could probably buy that person out and then take over the route, so to speak. But I know in our area there's one guy, and still a whole bunch of people call Missoula because he doesn't do any advertising and he has a full schedule. So there's opportunity. There's I was about to make all sorts of stupid jokes about black gold, and anyway. Roof repair. Roof repair is a wonderful win-win. You need to know what you're doing. So the entry point to that would be you'd have to apprentice another roof repair person. They're always looking for good help. If you're enterprising and motivated, you might even be able to find an older guy who's kind of getting into the August of his life and would let you apprentice him and then buy his company from him. So that'd be a wonderful thing. You just walk right into that. He'd show you all the ropes. Home care. This one's interesting because I know a couple of people who do this, and you could do it at all scales. That's the surprise. You don't have to have a huge company. And again, there are regulations and things that you have to work through with this, and that you can work around if you limit your business to what you can do legally without the licensing. But there's a whole lot of stuff you can do. So one thing about wealthy old people is that they are stubborn as all get out. And some of them probably watch this channel, so welcome. But they really put a high price tag on not moving out of their house. They want to remain independent as long as they can, and they'll pay any amount of money to do it. So their kids will pay you to go visit them so that they're not lonely. They will pay you to take them to the grocery store, to help them shop. Whatever the case may be. The sky's the limit for the services you could offer with that. And that's something that could be really lucrative in a rural area because there are no young people who would be willing to do that. They all leave, right? Because they go to college. Diesel mechanic. I mentioned the excavator that lives out in my neck of the woods. But anyone that has heavy equipment, when it breaks, they need somebody to fix that stuff. Now, in my experience, it's probably easiest to find a mechanic out of all the service folks in a rural area. I'm not sure why that is, but it seems to be the case. So maybe that's the least attractive one on this whole list, but it's a thing. And then there's, so what my goal with that was to leverage the fact that people have farms, they have farm equipment, they really don't want to put a giant tractor on a flatbed and drive it all the way to town. If you can just come out to their place and fix their stuff, they might be willing to pay a premium for that. You're already there, right? But if you do the differential on the mileage costs and the time and hassle to load it all up and wait, because they're just going to get in the bay whenever, and then they have to go all the way back out to pick it up again. You just drive out there and fix their stuff. Or a mobile mechanic, just a regular mechanic, not a heavy equipment mechanic, but just a car mechanic. And you could come out to somebody's house. You might make some really good money that way. Even if you limited it to normal stuff, like I only do oil changes. And you just go out to somebody's house and change their oil for them. And that you're saving them massive amounts of time and money because they don't have to drive all the way into town, wait forever, and then drive back. It never ceased to surprise me. I do most of the car work myself, but it's amazing. You make an appointment to go get your oil changed to certain places. You get there, they're not ready for you, even though you're a little early. They're not ready for you at your appointment time. They make you wait. They finally get in there. They do something wrong. You get back home, you got to go back. It's happened to me a bunch of times. So normal people don't want that hassle, and you could just do that stuff for them. I don't have it on here, but handyman is another thing. Or the last thing here is veterinarian. You do have to go to college for that, but it's just one school. It's much easier to get into than med school. You've got some residual end times benefit of medical knowledge without having to go through the full system. And you do have to live in a city. I think there are only 4 vet schools in the U.S., something like that. So you're going to have to go there to go to college. But I think it's just a 4-year program. So you don't have to do an undergrad besides that. And you could start before you're 18 if you had your ducks in a row to get your GED or equivalent before that. So all that being said, I'm just trying to throw some principles at you. You'll find more principles in this book through faith. What I've presented here is not in that book. What's in that book is not presented here. But if you are interested in optimizing your life, I highly recommend this book. It's by me, Rob Smith. You can find it on Amazon at print cost. You can also get it for free on this channel, Upward Thought, and you can download the PDF. That's an audiobook on YouTube. And then you can download the PDF at upwardthought.blogspot.com. So if you're still with me, thanks for hanging around this long video. I think that is worth the length. These are really important things. Take care.